This is completely crazy. This was a scenario that no one could have predicted a year ago. Take a look at this Yahoo Finance headline. Institutions are now able to raise money for Ripple. You won't believe what this narrative is really about. The SEC. Yes, the same SEC that has spent years working to dismantle Ripple, just submitted a waiver that is beneficial to the company. What parallel universe, after all, did we just enter? In that joint filing with the SEC, do you recall Ripple's cross appeal that was just dismissed yesterday? Judge Torres declared the institutional XRP sales to be unregistered securities transactions, essentially making them unlawful. I take it that Ripple was preparing to challenge the decision. They intended to attempt to get the entire issue of securities or institutional sales reversed. However, we now live in a bizarre universe where the SEC is genuinely using waivers to benefit Ripple. You would have checked someone into a mental health clinic a year ago if they told you that the SEC would be helping Ripple seek institutional capital, but now we're here. The SEC and Ripple essentially joined hands and decided to dismiss all of these appeals, which was the big news from yesterday. However, this is where things start to go really haywire. Furthermore, the SEC didn't simply say, okay, we're done fighting, the very next day. No, they are now actively supporting Ripple and going above and beyond to aid them. That's how utterly outdated the entire crypto battle is. This was not even necessary for them to accomplish. In fact, a former SEC attorney has stated that their actions may be unlawful in supporting Ripple in this way. This isn't anything I made up. To be honest, this whole situation is quite crazy. You must be on top of the world though, if you're holding Ripple at the moment. But wait, I have to be completely honest with you before we go any farther. I have absolutely no experience in finance. Please don't buy or sell anything based only on what I've said here. I'm not offering you financial advice. Here is what transpired based on this report. On August 8th, just one day after the entire SEC versus Ripple controversy was finally resolved, the securities watchdog pulled another surprise. In fact, the disqualification that Ripple had been subject to as a result of that order was waived. And only a minute ago, I was receiving precisely the injunction I'm referring to. In essence, this injunction prevented Ripple from engaging in those illicit securities transactions, such as the institutional sales of XRP. Here's the worst part though. The court's final ruling in August 2024 explicitly said that Ripple could not raise money from institutions, but now they are able to do so once more. Allow me to explain everything to you. In December 2020, the SEC launched a vigorous attack on Ripple, accusing them of selling what they said were unregistered XRP securities in order to raise more than $1.3 billion. However, Ripple retaliated by stating that XRP is only digital currency and not a security. In July 2023, Judge Torres rendered a split ruling that, to be honest, was really intriguing. According to her, Ripple did not violate securities regulations when they offered XRP to ordinary retail customers like you and me through its programmatic sales. However, it did cross the line into securities breaches when they sold XRP directly to large institutional clients. Judge Torres then struck the ultimate blow in August 2024, fining Ripple over $125 million, and essentially told them to stop doing this. Naturally, I must pause at this point because it appears that the SEC and Ripple have become best friends. They're most likely forming bonds over their mutual love of velociraptors and building bunk beds together. Bonus points for correctly identifying the film I'm referring to without using artificial intelligence or Google. The problem is that prior to all of this, Ripple and the SEC had really met and negotiated a reduction in Ripple's penalties. What was the crux of their argument? If my memory serves me well, they decided on a sum of about $50 million rather than the substantial $125 million. Additionally, they sought to completely repeal that injunction, which would have greatly simplified Ripple's life. However, Judge Torres was not amenable to any of it at all. Nope, she answered. Not happening. All right, Ripple said, so we'll just drop our appeal and call it a day. Therefore, on August 7th, the parties formally concluded this matter and dismissed their appeals. The problem is that Ripple was still unable to raise funds through institutional XRP sales because of the injunction, which remained in place like a bottleneck. Additionally, Ripple was immediately disqualified under Rule 560 of the Securities Act as a result of that injunction. What does that signify? In essence, it prevents businesses from raising money through certain exemptions without having to deal with the hassle of SEC registration. However, the SEC just gave Ripple a lifeline by waiving the Rule 560 disqualification, and this is where it gets very interesting. Now, what is Ripple able to do? They can use the Regulation D exception to solicit money from accredited investors without being registered with the SEC. For them, that is extremely huge. John Deaton's crypto law firm informed me of this news on Friday afternoon. Here is John's own opinion on the matter. In essence, it has repercussions for business. As before, they can continue to raise money via private markets. If you were to be honest, it would seem as though the case and the $125 million penalties were a nightmare. And that's precisely why this situation is so problematic. 5 years of unmitigated upheaval, money wasted, and ordinary XRP holders being totally screwed over are all we're talking about. Now, though, it seems like none of that is important. The entire thing simply vanished. Isn't it unbelievable that we all endured that nightmare, seeing so many individuals harmed only for the SEC to come around and say, "Oh wait, whatever, you're fine." When you consider it, it is absolutely insane. Fred Rispoli, an attorney and member of the XRP community, posted this, and to be honest, the man was spot on. I kept claiming it didn't really matter, but he pointed out that I was completely wrong about Judge Torres altering the order. A new, more equitable, and more astute SEC might just provide Ripple with what they required. And what do you know? No one could ever convince him that the SEC was incapable of doing just that. He feels rather vindicated now, and with good reason. He was right on the money. The SEC did more than just have the ability to do it. They actually did it. Simply said, they made it happen. This is what lawyer and XRP community member Bill Morgan had to say, and he's really excited about it. This is just another victory for Ripple, he said. The bad actor label that Ripple was saddled with from the permanent injunction has been removed by an order recently issued by the SEC. This is really the next best option, because Judge Torres wouldn't simply throw out the entire injunction, and it will greatly facilitate their fundraising efforts. The big news is that Ripple can now once more conduct those exempt securities offerings. They have been pursuing a national bank charter, and this might help them get it. And that's a huge issue, dude. It's all simply another victory for the XRP ecosystem. You can argue about how much it helps, but at the absolute least, and I'm talking about the bare minimum, all of this is positive news that somehow helps us. And when someone questioned former SEC lawyer Mark Fagel about the entire waiver issue, we received his opinion. The legalities are pretty murky here, he said. In essence, he stated that the SEC's actions are completely unprecedented in the cryptocurrency space and may possibly be illegal. However, he then introduces this singer, who will object even if it is totally unlawful, unless XRP investors lose everything and begin to question why the SEC failed to protect them. Yes, exactly. As if holders of XRP will soon be pleading with the SEC for assistance. That isn't occurring at all. Look, it's obvious that XRP was among the first cryptocurrency winners. Yes, some harsh corrections could be made. In fact, I believe that an XRP bubble will eventually arise and bust. Although there have been some wild fluctuations along the road, I'm expecting that overall it will follow the same incredible rising trajectory that Bitcoin has shown us over the years. Thus, Mark is free to express himself as he pleases. However, that's how I envision it unfolding. I completely concur. Investors in XRP won't be sobbing over losses during this market cycle. Sure, some newcomers may swoop in at the very top, as they always do, but the people in the XRP community who have been working hard for years aren't going to the SEC for assistance. That is simply not going to occur. Then, Sherry, a member of the XRP community, poses an intriguing query. Hold on, isn't it possible for ordinary investors to sue Ripple directly for all of this? Pretty solid though, remarked Mark Fagel, but I don't think they'd even